I'm thrilled I stumbled across this news because if I'd finished my degree by now, I'd have missed this seismic shift. Freightliner, the iconic name behind America's toughest trucks, abruptly halted all US production with no warning or clear explanation. The headlines barely caught it, but the economic ripples are now rocking towns, ports, and political campaigns across the nation. This wasn't just a factory decision, it was the first domino in a manufacturing exodus. Why did this happen? Why did the collapse start in silence? And how did tariffs meant to shield America push its own industries overseas? Stay tuned, because by the end of this video, you'll see it wasn't just a policy misstep, it was a blueprint for collapse. Behind closed doors, Freightliner's Charlotte headquarters made no public statements and held no union talks, just eerie quiet. Optimism vanished as capital improvement plans disappeared from internal memos. Leadership cancelled regional trips discreetly, signalling a shift from growth to retreat. Shareholders got early briefings, but union reps were left clueless. What followed was a carefully crafted roadmap clerked in vague terms: consolidation of operations, strategic realignment, global efficiency optimization. In plain English, it meant closing American plants and moving production abroad. 3 of Freightliner's largest US sites were marked for shutdown. Internal plans outlined timelines, severance budgets, labour contract termination strategies, and protocols to manage public backlash. These weren't backup plans, they were orders awaiting board approval. Meanwhile, on factory floors in places like Gaffney and Cleveland, workers kept the lines moving, unaware that spreadsheets in Charlotte were already calculating their exit. The betrayal stunned deeper because of how precisely it was hidden. Equipment audits were passed off as safety checks, and staffing reviews were framed as performance tweaks. Freightliner's leadership knew the stakes and kept workers in the dark until the plan was ready to execute. When the signal finally came, it wasn't a discussion, it was a detonation. The fallout wasn't just a closure, it was a rupture in thousands of lives. The Gaffney plant was more than a workplace, it was the heartbeat of the town. Families had worked there for generations, with wages fueling homes, education, and local businesses. When the shutdown hit, everything crumbled in real time. Not a gentle notice as some workers were escorted off the floor, others got cold emails. Within weeks, thousands were jobless. Contractors, delivery partners, and maintenance crews saw their livelihoods vanish alongside the main operation. Local businesses folded, diners emptied, barbershops went silent, and the school district axed its music program. Even elective surgeries at the town hospital dropped as people lost health insurance. Gaffney wasn't just losing, Jobsit was losing its identity. The emotional toll outstripped the economic devastation. Workers with decades of service felt discarded. Community trust eroded in church basements and grocery aisles, where conversations turned to grievances. Residents didn't just blame Freightliner, they turned their anger toward Washington. Tariffs, once hailed as patriotic, had instead obliterated a key part of the local economy. It wasn't foreign competition that killed their jobs, it was domestic policy. Across the country, other towns braced for the same fate. The numbers tell a stark truth. Freightliner's collapse was no accident, it was calculated. Before tariffs, Freightliner's US profit margin sat near 14%. Within 9 months, it plummeted to just above 4%. Internal projections showed a 40% output increase was needed just to break even, an impossible target. Foreign competitors like Volvo, Hyundai, and Tata had secured long-term steel contracts, shielding them from global price swings. Their trucks hit American lots with better dealer incentives and sharper pricing. While Freightliner cut costs and delayed orders, rivals ramped up deliveries. What Freightliner called a tough choice was, in reality, a long-planned pivot. Transition documents were ready weeks in advance, detailing facility relocations, layoff schedules, and media scripts. This wasn't a panicked reaction, it was an orderly exit. The shutdown wasn't the end, it was the opening chapter. When an industrial giant like Freightliner leaves, it creates a vacuum, and what fills it often comes from far beyond US borders. The moment Freightliner froze US production, boardrooms nationwide sprang into action. Analysts pored over data, and executives huddled in private. The question wasn't whether Freightliner failed, it was whether they jumped ship first. Senior leaders at Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis met in Detroit, debating if Freightliner's move signaled a new reality. Staying loyal to American manufacturing might now be financially reckless. Suppliers got the message fast. Component makers tied to Freightliner's orders began contacting competitors, sensing the need to pivot before the collapse spread. Some quietly slashed US capacity forecasts, others looked to Mexico or India for stability. Logistics firms adjusted to one major carrier, once reliant on hauling to Freightliner plants, shifted to e-commerce contracts before the shutdown was even finalised. They weren't waiting for the next blow, they were dodging the crater. Hey, if you're finding this news eye-opening, hit that subscribe button and join Dry-Fed Dani's mission to hit 1,000 subscribers. Your support keeps us digging into stories like this. Let's keep the momentum going. Freightliner's retreat didn't just redefine resilience, it made leaving America acceptable, even justifiable, to shareholders. The shift was swift. Companies that had stayed quiet now had cover. Harley-Davidson seized the opening, announcing a Thailand expansion. Observers weren't shocked Freightliner had paved the way. What was once a PR disaster was now brushed off with a single line: "We're optimizing our global footprint." Ford executives scouted Ontario and Querétaro. Boeing quietly expanded in Poland and Brazil. These moves weren't hidden, they were normalized. Shareholder reports touted international diversification, while marketing stayed patriotic. But operational maps told a different truth. Companies were loyal to profit, not countries. The collapse hit hard in Gaffney, Cleveland, and Mount Holly. Paychecks vanished, and so did foot traffic. Local governments saw tax revenue plummet. Schools lost students not from declining birth rates, but because families left. At Pauline's Diner, the morning crowd disappeared, and owner Evelyn laid off half her staff. A place once buzzing with laughter now serves silence and farewell meals. Home prices tanked. $200,000 listings sat unsold at $160,000, not due to damage, but because no one invests in a town without jobs. Workers who'd spent decades in manufacturing took part-time gigs at discount stores. Churches hosted job fairs alongside services. Pharmacies saw spikes in stress prescriptions. Local headlines read like eulogies for a way of life. Residents demanded answers. Newspaper editorials called out lawmakers. Some begged for federal aid. Others demanded accountability. Tariffs, meant to protect jobs, had instead triggered a manufacturing exodus. In emergency hearings, a bipartisan committee reviewed job data, revealing a grim trend: Freightliner's move was just the start. A dozen other firms were exploring offshore transitions. Rising material costs and global competitors, steel access made leaving easier than staying. Congress floated tax incentives for returning production and penalties for offshoring, but trust was already broken. Industry groups warned, if Freightliner can walk, anyone can. Political campaigns grew tense. Protesters held signs questioning where politicians were when factories went quiet. Incumbents scrambled while opponents labelled them betrayers of the working class. While Washington debated, the world acted. Freightliner's exit was an invitation for global manufacturers. China moved first, with Guangdong and Jiangsu officials offering tax holidays, subsidised logistics, and fast-track permits. What took years in the US took weeks abroad. Freightliner executives, under diplomatic cover, signed deals that would have sparked outrage on American soil. Within 60 days, new production lines were under construction in Foshan and Suzhou, designed to outpace US plants in efficiency and cost. Steel, aluminum, and electronics costs dropped nearly 50%. Red tape vanished, environmental rules were lax, and unions were not existent. India followed, with Gujarat's automotive corridor offering similar deals. Ports at Kandla and Mundra geared up for outbound freight. Within 90 days, Freightliner-branded shipments flowed from Indian ports, with parts once made in South Carolina now cut in Ahmedabad. This wasn't... Europe capitalised too. Germany's Ministry for Economic Affairs circulated a brief titled Opportunity Windows, outlining how to exploit America's market gaps. Daimler, Freightliner's parent, redirected capital to German and Polish plants. Factory expansions in Zwickau and Jawur were greenlit in weeks. Daimler reps, fluid in US trucking sales, offered contracts to Freightliner's former dealers. Volkswagen's commercial vehicle division targeted municipal fleet contracts, garbage trucks, city vehicles, and long-haul transport built in Slovakia, Slovenia, and Hungary, then shipped via Hamburg, Le Havre, and Antwerp. Volvo, manufacturing in Belgium and Poland, boosted North American exports by 5% in a single quarter. Europe didn't just gain market share, it redefined industrial confidence, while America's market stability cracked. Behind corporate doors, strategy trumped sympathy. Freightliner's pivot wasn't to stumble, it was premeditated. For every public statement calling the shutdown regrettable, internal memos praised its foresight. Staying in the US was too risk-labour complexity, volatile policy, and cost structures made it untenable. A Michigan stamping firm tied to Freightliner began talks with Sao Paulo and Buenos Aires partners, translating brochures into Portuguese. A tomato company making suspension brackets signed with a Turkish firm for North American distribution. Global decoupling became a boardroom mantra. Suppliers, logistics coordinators, and consultants reassessed their US reliance. Budgets shifted to global supply chain optimization, legal teams studied foreign labour laws, and IT departments prepped for remote factory oversight. Freightliner hadn't abandoned America, it had evolved, shedding outdated plans like ballast. Others wanted out too. If you're as fired up about this news as we are, hit subscribe and help Dry-Fed Dani reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support fuels our deep dives into stories that matter. Let's keep exposing the truth together. Washington was still holding hearings when the world completed its pivot. Lawmakers debated whether Freightliner's exit was a warning, betrayal, or necessity. It was all three, but it was too late. Some blamed Trump's tariffs for spiking costs and spooking investors, others pointed to environmental rules, union pressure, or weak trade enforcement. The political theatre raged, but industry didn't wait. South Korea launched a 100,000 truck export plan for North America by 2027. Mexico offered assembly subsidies in Monterrey and Querétaro. Turkey upgraded Izmir and Mersin ports for automotive shipping. America, meanwhile, was stuck. Trucking schools grappled with foreign diagnostic systems, mechanics retrained on European software, and dealers rewrote contracts. The American freight dashboard was now written in a dozen languages. At the consumer level, trust eroded. Truckers faced longer parts wait times, and fleet operators questioned imported units' reliability. Freightliner's departure didn't just vacate assembly lines, it broke the myth that American manufacturing was essential. Those last US-built trucks may still roll, but their successors are made cheaper, faster, and far from the American flag. Freightliner's exit shattered more than output, it broke faith. America believed in a covenant. Build here, stay here. Communities invested. Build here, stay here. Communities invested in training centres, infrastructure, and tax breaks, expecting corporate loyalty. Freightliner proved that loyalty was conditional, tied to margins, politics, and speed. Tariffs meant to protect exposed how unprepared America's manufacturing was. Without a robust domestic steel ecosystem or agile transport infrastructure, the policy collapsed. By the time relief measures were drafted, supply chains had rerouted, talent was negotiating abroad, and confidence was harder to rebuild than jobs. Freightliner executives never faced South Carolina town halls. Their silence was deafening. Local governments and economic directors shifted gears. Cities stopped chasing corporate giants and built resilient networks of small, adaptable businesses. In business schools, Freightliner's collapse replaced innovation case studies with warnings about misplaced trust. While Washington debated fixes, real change came from the ground up. In the wreckage, workers fought back. In Gaffney, Cleveland, and Mount Holly, laid-off engineers, welders, and machinists formed collectives. Some rented warehouse space for fabrication shops, others built cooperatives to remanufacture parts for older fleets. In South Carolina, a group retrofitted a delivery truck with an electric powertrain for municipal use, landing city contracts. Their motto, "Built here, stays here." Supply chain managers launched logistics software startups for agricultural co-ops. A retired Freightliner supervisor worked with farmers on low-cost irrigation systems. Local banks issued microgrants as federal aid stalled. Towns experimented with community lending, betting on ingenuity over scale. This wasn't nostalgia with sovereignty. Even Freightliner's global pivot hit snags. Shipping delays and labour instability in India cut margins. In China, environmental rules and political friction slowed output. Trucks arrived late or incomplete, and technical support calls spiked. Service parts for imported models grew scarce. Independent truckers vowed to avoid Freightliner's next models. A board member admitted they might have underestimated the value of US proximity. It wasn't a promise to return, but it was a crack in their confidence. Locals didn't wait. Workforce councils reactivated, colleges revived machining courses, and contractors proposed plant retrofits. Shuttered facilities were maintained, roofs fixed, utilities kept on. A former foreman checked gates weekly, unpaid, refusing to let the plants decay. Opportunity could strike without warning, and they'd be ready. Freightliner's exit sparked a new industrial story. States like North Carolina and Michigan passed laws supporting small-scale manufacturing cooperatives. Cities zoned for microfactories and vertical farms. Public land once reserved for corporate plants became mixed-use hubs tied to local ownership. The 2026 USMCA review became a flashpoint, with lawmakers pushing domestic production quotas and offshoring penalties. Freightliner was named in hearings are symbol of what happens without guardrails. The real shift came from below. In workshops, classrooms and incubators, a new economy emerged, one not reliant on multinational loyalty or cheap labour. It didn't collapse with tariffs. America learned slogans aren't strategy, ribbon cuttings aren't permanence, and pride in production needs power to back it. Freightliner left a hole, but from it grew a durable, less flashy strength. This wasn't about trucks, it was about ownership, and now the people held the keys. What's your take on this? Drop it in the comments below, and if you want to keep up with the latest news, hit subscribe and help drive that Dani hit 1,000 subscribers. Follow for more breaking updates.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai